Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Thank you for watching the Jaybefaunt Show. I'm your host, James Fauntleroy. It's so good to see you today. I will be doing the next reading of Dirty Truths by Michael Parenti. We're going to be going into chapter 1, part 8. This is actually going to be the next part. And just to let you guys know, thank you so very much for watching and being a supporter. If you're a supporter on Patreon or Coffee, I want to give you a warm, deep thank you from the top and bottom of my heart. It means a lot to keep this going. So I appreciate that. This is actually really short. So I'm going to be doing a second reading right after this, but I just wanted to do this. And I want to keep it in parts instead of mixing the parts together. But one thing I want to do is I want to make sure I cover this one. This part of Dirty Truths by Michael Parenti, the chapter is term limits, trick or treat. So this is actually going to be interesting. This is going to be talking about term limits regarding the legislative branches within the United States Congress, as for as to the House and the Senate. So Michael Parenti is going to give his thoughts in there. Thank you so much for joining, and well, let's get into it, people. Term limits, trick or treat. There's much urgent talk about the need to limit incumbency in the U.S. Congress, most of it coming from the right. In California, a number of other states, things went further than talk. The liberal leadership of the state legislature was forced out of office after voters passed a proposition limiting assembly tenure to 6 years and Senate tenure to 8 years. During the 1990 campaign, President Bush and Vice President Quayle made a point of journeying to California to support term limits. Unfortunately, a number of people of progressive persuasion are standing shoulder to shoulder with the right wingers on this issue. They would rid the Congress of entrenched oligarchs who long ago sold their souls to the money interests. Competition would improve the quality of candidates and limit the influence of PACs. Infusions of fresh blood would also bring fresh and creatively progressive ideas and a more democratic performance. A conservative scheme. If all that were true, why would right wingers like George Bush, Dan Quayle, and George Will favor term limits and a swifter turnover of congressional occupants? It is because they are desirous of seeing the entrenched money interest routed and more democratic and progressive Congress emerge. I'm sorry. Is it because they are desirous of seeing the entrenched money interest routed and a more democratic and progressive Congress emerging? I suspect they have a different agenda. Conservatives have nothing against incumbency when it comes to their people who are filling the slots. Some conservatives, most notably President Nixon and more vehemently President Reagan during his last days in office, have wanted to abolish the 22nd Amendment, which places a two-term limit on a presidential incumbent. Conservatives feel that they have an inside track on the presidency for several reasons. First, the defection of the South into the GOP column has given the Republicans a built-in head start in the Electoral College. The very same head start once enjoyed by the Democratic Party when the South was solidly Democratic. Second, the Electoral College gives 2 extra votes to each state regardless of population, thereby padding the number of electors claimed by numerous smaller and more conservative states. Third, the most important of all, it takes hundreds of millions of dollars to win a presidential nomination and election. The presidency has been priced out of reach of many progressives. The decline of grassroots party organizations and the domination of national campaigns by television has only increased the need for big money and decreased popular input. No wonder the Republicans would like to get rid of term limits in regard to the presidency. To my knowledge, no conservative has uttered a word favoring constitutional amendment that would limit terms of Supreme Court justices or federal judges. Judges must be, quote unquote, independent from politically partisan pressures, they argue, so that they remain judiciously objective in their judgments. The dirty truth is that the judiciary was thoroughly packed during the Reagan and Bush administrations with hundreds of relatively young conservative ideologues who would be handing down decisions into the third decade of the next century. The Clinton appointees to the federal courts are mostly people of conventional or unpronounced political orientation who are more or less at home with the conservatives on most issues. Why do many conservatives who see nothing wrong with limitless terms for presidents and lifelong appointments for judges want limited terms for Congress? Footnote reads, as far as I know, only one prominent conservative, Pat Buchanan, has come out for term limits on federal judges as of October 1995, and he does not push the issue very strongly. Back to the paragraph. Ronald Reagan gave us the answer. Just before leaving office, he commented that the executive and judiciary, quote unquote, are fine, but the legislature still remains a, quote unquote, a problem. He meant that the substantial liberal political formation still survived in Congress. These liberals occasionally favored the Democratic interest over money interest. They call, albeit weakly, for taxing the rich. They have passed, watered down, laws for occupational safety, public housing, public transportation, clean air, clean water, and bigger cuts in military spending. They support at least minimum levels of human services for the indigent and stricter regulations for the banking industry, the timber industry, and other plunderers. And many of them keep getting reelected. Though pitifully inadequate in terms of what is really needed, all this is enough to annoy any right winger. For decades, political scientists point out that the congressional seniority system allowed for the entrenchment of conservatives of both parties. They presided like petty tyrants over their committee strappies and accumulated power over the legislative process by virtue of being repeatedly elected. For decades, such criticisms were ignored. Today, the seniority system isn't what it used to be, but is still operative. For the first time, when liberals and even some left progressives like Ron Dellums and John Conyers moved into committee chairs, suddenly the issue of incumbency was targeted by conservatives and publicized in the national media. It became an issue for the corporate mainstream media because it had become a conservative crusade. An amateur Congress. With term limits, we will be faced with a rotating amateur Congress, one perpetually populated by freshmen and sophomores who must leave office after their second or third stint, facing off against a well-entrenched national security state, a large professional bureaucracy, and corporate lobbyists who are elected by no one, but who will be far more experienced and long-lived than the term-limited legislators. The legislative amateurs will still need large sums of money to get elected and will be even more vulnerable than before to powerful professional lobbyists. They will also be increasingly dependent on congressional staffers who are elected by no one. And when one recalls that it takes many years and sometimes decades of struggle to pass major legislation that could offer some protection of public interest, we might wonder who in Congress will be able to stick around long enough to see things through. I suspect that is why conservatives suddenly became so enthusiastic about rotation of legislative office. A more rapid turnover would wipe out any potential seniority of the Democratic liberals in Congress and would pit short term transient legislators against an entrenched and increasingly conservative state power. Unlike some liberals, people like Reagan and Bush do not treat process and performance as if existing in a social vacuum. They are keenly aware of how ongoing institutional arrangements advance or retard their political interests. They understand power because they have so much of it and have so much to protect with it. In 1994, for the first time in decades, the Republicans won a majority in both houses of Congress. Most of the conservative ideologues among them still remain committed to term limits. A bill proposing term limits was defeated after a close vote. In the years since, feeling they have a good chance to retain control of Congress, conservatives feel, conservatives seem to have quieted down about the issue. In any case, before progressive people jump on any bandwagon to quote unquote throw out the rascals out, they better check on who else is going along for the ride. And that's it. That's that part. It's kind of short. But it's interesting how it's kind of two-sided, because the thing is that a lot of us, there's a lot of people who on our left who talk about um, term limits when it comes to not only people who are in Congress, because I mean, we have a lot of octogenarians and septuagenarians that are in Congress that have been, reelected over and over and over and over. A lot of people are tired of, having people who you know, constantly have been put back in Congress, and yet they're very old. They're old timers. That being said, you know, there's two different arguments that can be made. There's the argument that someone, who is very good could be taken out of Congress, somebody that has a solid track record of helping people. You wouldn't want to lose that person, but at the same time, you also would want term limits, because you don't want people who are damaging for others to continuously be there, and they're not, they don't have to face, the risk of being ousted by somebody new, because they have that establishment. So so I mean, I'm at the point where I'm just like throw them all out and start everything anew and do direct democracy, because truth be told, it just seems like a better option to do direct democracy than it is to have these people who are tainted and having the risk of people who are tainted. Really, it should be a dictatorship of the proletariat, or the workers, basically, instead of having these representatives who are always subject to being adulterated by the capitalist system and by oligarchs and um, the oppressors. So, but it's interesting, to see that how Michael Parenti explains it. That's some damn good tea. But yeah, so that was a short but informative term limits, trick or treat. I say term limits, but term limits only apply. I say term limits, but term limits applied after a revolution, basically. Because you can try to place term limits now, but is it really going to do any good? And if you leave things the way they are, it's still not doing any good. It's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You're still going to end up with, BS. You're still going to end up with crap, so to speak. That being said, the entire system needs to be, a new foundation needs to be laid. Because it's built in a way that doesn't favor us at all. Think about the inception of this country. The inception of this country favored wealthy white landowners. That being said, the wealthy white landowners, they were basically the corporations of the past. They were the oligarchs of the past. This nation was built for them. So therefore, it was built and molded by them. So it's just like having a foundation laid, but there was no extra foundation poured for different rooms or the shape of the house being different. So in order to really make a better foundation, you basically have to take a jackhammer to it, crack it up, get a bulldozer, bulldoze that foundation of rocks out of the way, and pour new concrete and shape it in a way that actually favors, a better house. And so that's honestly where I'm at right now, where I look at the way I look at things. And so it actually kind of talks about, if you guys go to my Rockfin channel, where I'm reading George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, he actually talks about how he doesn't think that electoral politics, is viable in any way. And in fact, he takes more of what people would describe a more accelerationist type of view, meaning that we already live in fascism, which Parenti agrees we already live in a fascist state. And so, but the only thing is that it's not as apparent to people as it is to some of us who are more politically astute. That being said, then in order for people to truly realize it, then it has to be kind of activated, optically, so that people see how bad things really are, so that they're activated in a sense, so that they can rise up against the fascist elements within our country. And so that means allowing, the most grotesque or morally repugnant people to really gain electoral power, so that it drives people to wake up. And one of the things that I said in my stream on there was, think about how many people fell asleep as soon as Joe Biden went into office, because so many people are brainwashed or propagandized into thinking that, okay, we got somebody better in office, so therefore we can relax. We can go to sleep now. We can go to brunch, as a lot of us on the left would say. And so because they did that, there was a rude awakening when you have bombings, when you have a lot of, the racial and fascistic elements from people who are, far right, that are, doing things against a lot of us who are disenfranchised. There's a shock that happens when you find out the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and is now looking at gay rights and Brown versus Board of Education. There's that shock that happens because people expected it from Trump. They weren't expecting it to happen under Biden. And the thing is that unfortunately, what a lot of people don't realize is that there are two different types of fascists in this country. There's the covert fascist and there's the overt fascist. Trump was the overt fascist. Guess who's the covert, right? The covert fascist is the person that smiles in your face, that makes you think they're not fascist, or they'll tell you they're not, while putting in fascist policies and then making you think that it's for your good. And then when it comes time, really, for you to exercise your rights as a citizen of this country, then the fascist elements take over, and then they bash your head in, and they bash your head in either through the NSA or the FBI, the CIA. They, do covert operations and things like that. Look at what's going on with some of the black leftist groups that have been, the Uhurus. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. Or, the African People's Socialist Party. They've been, they were, basically, targeted by the FBI. And so, with that being said, people are now starting to realize that the fascistic elements go deeper into our government than they even realized. Think about things like Operation Paperclip, which basically showed that really fascism is really interwoven into the very fabric of the United States government. And it's been there ever since this inception, because really the marriage between corporations and state power have been there since the inception. Because really, if you look at the Constitution, it's really focused on the in favor of wealthy white landowners, who basically were the first corporate owners, the first oligarchs of this country. So that's what it is. So really, it's baked into the cake of this system. And so as people realize this, then now people are starting to wake up. Now these fascistic elements that were laid dormant, they actually put laws in place. They've actually put systems in place to keep you down. Now, when you start to wake up and you start to fight up against it, then guess what? Now you have a militarized police, right? You have surveillance that are, that are infringing upon your rights to privacy. And so we're actually less free now than we were years ago because they couldn't do things in an overt fashion to get rid of your rights. They had to do it in a covert way to make you hand it over. See, you were bamboozled into handing it over. Things like the Patriot Act, things like the crime bill, things like that, things like the drug war. These things were actually a covert way into handing over your rights so that, guess what? Now that you finally woke up, they already have you handcuffed before you can even look down. So that's what really was really interesting about this. And I will be continuing of the reading on Michael Parenti's. We are now entering chapter 2. So chapter 2, part 1 of Dirty Shoes by Michael Parenti, with this media and culture, and it says the liberal media myth. So we're going to continue that. So now we're venturing to chapter 2. So this is going to be really exciting. So I can't wait to start on this. I'll be starting on this pretty much right after the stream, and I'll be uploading that. I'll probably have it uploaded tomorrow or Monday, depending on how I feel. But yeah, so but yes, this is a very interesting read. And yeah, so thank you so much. Also, by the way, as far as what Parenti was saying about how term limits are concerned, uh, how do you feel about term limits? What is your opinion? Put it down in the comments and let me know. I actually do read the comments especially when it comes to the readings, because I find it very interesting when I do the readings for Parenti and people have their different opinions, and I would like to see that as well. Um, and please make sure to leave a like. And if you have not subscribed, please make sure to subscribe. I actually do these readings. I try to do these readings at least once a week. I do the readings for Michael Parenti, and I also do on Rockfin exclusively Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. I can't unfortunately read Blood in My Eye by George Jackson on YouTube because it is too spicy for YouTube. So then you're going to have to go to my Rockfin channel by the same name, the Jaybefaunt Show. So thank you so much to everybody for tuning in. I just want to say, eat a cookie, laugh a little, because joy is a revolutionary act. And yeah, forehead kisses to all of you.